Welcome to the first WSUM workshop. My name is Kelsey Brannon. I am the Director of Radio at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and Madison Student Radio. I want to thank you all for being here today. This is really exciting. WSUM's 20th anniversary is on Tuesday. We've been on the air for 20 years, and we're proud to celebrate with a series of workshops that are led by station alumni. Before we get into our first workshop, though, I do want to take a moment to reflect on a loss that the WSUM community suffered earlier this week. WSUM's co-founder and first general manager, Dave Black, passed away over the weekend. Dave was absolutely integral to the station's launch and exponential growth and subsequent success. Over 2,000 alumni passed through the station, and Dave left an impression on each and every one of them. I'm not the only one on the call that can attest to this. Many of us credit our entire careers to Dave, myself included. Over the course of this week, as I've spoken with students and alumni about whether or not these workshops should continue, the consensus was that it seemed right to move forward because Dave was relentlessly devoted to providing educational opportunities to students and community members. So we really strongly believe that he would want this particular show to go on. So thank you for joining us. Before I introduce our speakers for this morning's workshop, I would like for us to hold a moment of silence in Dave's memory. All right, thank you, everyone. More information about Dave Black and his legacy can be found at WSUM.org. We will turn our attention now to this morning's workshop, Reporting and Producing for Broadcast. I am pleased to introduce Aleesa Kuznetsov and Maayan Silver. Aleesa joins us from the Twin Cities, where she is currently a local news producer at Fox 9. Prior to working at Fox 9, she was producer at WISH in Indianapolis and NBC 15 in Madison. While at WSUM, she hosted a music show called Femme Fatale and served as traffic director, production director, and station manager. Maayan joins us from Milwaukee, where she is a reporter for WUWM's news team. She joined WUWM as a volunteer in 2016 while she was a practicing criminal defense attorney. Her work has been featured on Morning Edition, All Things Considered, Weekend Edition, Here and Now, and she's been a guest with BBC NewsHour, On Point, The Takeaway, and the NPR Politics podcast. Aleesa and Maayan, thank you for being here. I will let the two of you take it away.
Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. We put together a little presentation for us to go through. There we go. Okay. So we wanted to start by talking just a bit about how we got into broadcast journalism. We both have kind of different paths to where we are. And I guess I'll start. I kind of took a more traditional route, I guess you could say. I was in the J School, the School of Journalism at UW-Madison. And I was involved with WSUM. I actually wasn't involved in news at all when I was at WSUM. That was where I did all my music stuff that I really had a passion for, and kind of explored more of the news part while in the journalism school. And then I took Pat Hastings' class, which is was a broadcast journalism class, kind of the only one in the J School. And that really put me on the path to producing. And producing is in a really high demand right now, and kind of has been the past few years. So I got a lot of offers right out of school, and yeah, kind of climbed up the ladder to come back home and produce in Minneapolis, where I am now.
Thanks, Aleesa. So I had a completely different entry point into journalism. I never went to J school. I never really even wrote for the school newspaper unless maybe once or twice I got finagled to do that by a friend or something. So I had no journalism experience, and I studied literature in Hebrew and English literature in undergrad, and then I went to UW Law School. And I actually practiced as a criminal defense attorney for over 10 years. I was doing that. And one day I was just like, I really need a change. And I loved NPR. I loved on my commute listening to the radio station and hearing stories from all over the world, and, you know, reporting from kind of everywhere. And I ended up finding like a perfect class at UW Milwaukee to audit. It was called News Writing and Technology, from someone who used to work at WUWM, and she taught us how to use like some of the, like an H6, like there's like a handheld recording device that you can use to interview people. She taught us how to edit audio and some basics about news writing. And then from then on, my experience was basically just on the job experience or my own curiosity following it. I started interviewing friends about food memories, nothing too serious, nothing too difficult, but just interviewing people and then cutting up the tape and making a story out of it and narrating it. And then I ended up finding an internship at Milwaukee's NPR station here in Milwaukee, and then worked on their show that they produce, a daily interview show, and then became a reporter in 2018. So it's really like, based on my experience, you can have like a wide range of backgrounds if you're interested in journalism and reporting.
Okay, so we want to split up kind of the difference between TV versus radio newsrooms and kind of how they operate. So starting with TV, there's local affiliates basically. So every city will usually have an ABC, a CBS, a Fox, and an NBC station. And then they all have owners. Their owners aren't necessarily going to be like Fox or NBC. They're sometimes owned by other companies. So that's just kind of how but then you all share content. So my station is owned by Fox. They kind of own all the big football cities, football markets, and also just the biggest cities. So we kind of can share content from every other big city. So if something big is happening in New York, we can go look at our video that our New York affiliate got and use that, and vice versa. We all are able to share content. Obviously, the biggest difference between TV and radio is TV is a visual medium. So we're trying to tell compelling stories, not just through writing scripts, but also how we show it, the sound bites we get, the video we get, being able to show emotion and show an event, show what's going on. There's some stories that maybe we won't always report on or dive as deep into because it's more of a story that's like for the paper. It's just not very visual. So that is a big part. Breaking news is always pretty big. We're always trying to get on the record with breaking news and anything big that's happening. For example, currently probably the biggest story right now is both Minneapolis public school teachers and St. Paul public school teachers have authorized to strike, which is a huge, huge, huge story right now. And that's something we were, last night, they were voting last night. We were following it all night. We had cameras. We were in contact with the union's offices about their vote and all that kind of stuff. And the vote came at midnight. And I think we had someone on the web team stay until midnight to be able to get that on our website. Features and specials are another kind of bigger thing. We have an investigative team that does investigative pieces. We also have different specials, like we have, it's called Voices for Change. It's kind of we fit a lot of different things under that umbrella, just people who are making an impact on their community, or, and especially with a special focus on minority communities. Our most recent story we did earlier this week was a school district that is near tribal land is going to start offering Dakota language classes, which is really important because there's not many people that can still speak it. And there's a huge Native population, multiple tribes in Minnesota, as there are in Wisconsin. So that was like our most recent. And we also have like fun specials too. We have this reporter, his name's Maury Glover. He's known for doing these like really fun, cool stories, like Lego master builders, or this guy who had giant hands and is like this amazing arm wrestler. He just has fun stories for us. So he has his own little feature called Maury's Stories. And then once or twice a year, we kind of do a special with all his stories combined. And kind of the newest thing that's becoming bigger in TV news is streaming, just because that's kind of where our audience is headed towards. That can be on YouTube, on our website. For example, right now, we're streaming on our YouTube page the sentencing for Kim Potter. She was the officer that shot and killed Dante Wright. That was during the Derek Chauvin trial. It was a lot of unrest. So she's being sentenced right now. So we have a stream up so that people can watch if they're at work or whatever they want to do. And we try and stream any kind of big events. Yesterday, we're the home of the Vikings, our station is. So yesterday, we had a whole streaming event, and it was on air too, when they announced the new head coach and had the first press conference and all that kind of stuff. So streaming is definitely kind of a direction we're expanding into right now. And I think all of local TV is expanding into, being able to bring news to people as it's happening, even if we're not on air. Like, we're not on air right now, but the Potter trial is happening right now. So they're sentencing. So we want to be able to bring that to people. So yeah.
Thanks, Aleesa. So Aleesa was talking about TV being a visual medium, and I'm in radio, public radio in particular, and that's and obviously an audio medium. I kind of think about it as almost like drawing versus painting. Like, I feel like sometimes when you do a drawing of a scene, but you're just doing it in pencil, you can get all the shades and it can still be very powerful. But maybe TV is a little bit more like painting, like you see all the colors and you see the facial expressions. But that doesn't mean that radio can't be really, really powerful, especially, print can be a really great way to get information in, but radio is just its own sort of special animal, because when you're actually hearing the soundbite from somebody around the country or around the world that you're listening to, it can have a big impact in a way that maybe seeing it on a print story maybe might not have. Sometimes it's nice not to be distracted by visual, although I love TV, I love TV news, but it's just its own kind of unique medium, and I really appreciate working in it. And I'm not built for visual, so I guess there's something for everybody. But the radio newsroom is a little bit different than the local TV newsroom that Aleesa was talking about. First of all, we've got a big structure through NPR and its member stations. And some of you may be familiar with this, but I'll just give you like some basic facts about it. So National Public Radio has central offices in Washington, DC, and also a West Coast office in Culver City, California. It was actually first established by an act of Congress. So it gets congressional and the public media donations, but we also have to raise money through listenership, and that's our largest source of funding. It first aired in 1971, and as of now, nearly 60 million people around the country listen or read NPR content each week. And that's where we come in. There are more than 260 member stations around the country. And those stations, a lot of them are connected to universities, but they're all public media stations. And WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, is one of them, and we sort of cover southeastern Wisconsin. So if some of you are listening in Madison area, you're probably familiar with Wisconsin Public Radio. They are actually based in Madison and other areas around the state, and they cover like the whole rest of the state, and we kind of have the sort of like we're kind of more have the eminence in southeastern Wisconsin. And there are about 1,800 local journalists around the country that are connected to NPR. And, you know, day to day at WUWM, we have like these major flagship shows that air during the day, and people listen on the radio, but they also listen on smart speakers and on the NPR One app. Those are all like different ways to get our content. And we have shows like Morning Edition, All Things Considered, Here and Now, and those are a mix of like shorter interviews with newsmakers, as well as produced feature stories with like a host lead in and tracking from the reporter, and sound bites and characters in the story. So there's like a local host who runs the board during those programs on WUWM and on every member station around the country, but it's a mix. There's also national hosts at the same time. So there's really kind of like NPR has sort of really understood the blend of the local national. It's kind of happening. And at the same time, while local newspapers and local journalism agencies are sort of diminishing around the country, the member station network and group for public radio has been growing. And so that's kind of an interesting trend. I'm not exactly sure why. I would have to read more up on it, but our station in particular is growing, and we have more reporters now than we did before. And so it's kind of a good thing in terms of a trend for local news. And another thing that I'd like to mention is there are ways to collaborate with national. So we produce a lot of our content locally, but we can also get stories on the national air if we pitch the national editors and they want to do a story, or if there's some big national event happening, like in like the Rittenhouse trial, or you know, stuff happening with election laws and things like that, or the presidential race. So we can get stuff on national. And there are also journalism hubs around the country and subject matter collaborations between NPR and local radio journalists.
Okay, so a little bit on the day-to-day for both of us. As a TV news producer, you kind of dip your toes into everything that's happening. And you're kind of you're pretty much in charge of whatever newscasts you're doing. So like tonight, I'm doing the 9 p.m. Newscast. I'll go into work later today. And the first thing that happens is our editorial meeting. And that's kind of where all the reporters and managers, producers, web, we all come in a meeting, and here's what's been happening today. Here's what's going on later today. And our reporters pitch their stories. I can pitch stories, and we all kind of talk about what do we want to cover today? What do we think is important? And go from there. Obviously, everything is subject to breaking news in the local newsroom. So if something happens, things pivot really, really quickly. And, you know, we're moving reporters, or we're sending a photojournalist, or we're, you know, kind of deciding what we want to do. Another kind of big portion of my day-to-day is just finding information and understanding the story. You know, sometimes stories come to us in the form of just a press release. Other times I have to listen to a press conference and understand what's going on. Sometimes we get tips in, and other times it's just using, you know, pretty much every newsroom is partners with the Associated Press. So if they have a story, I kind of comb through everything, and I'm like, okay, what do I want to include? What's kind of the biggest stories of the day locally and nationally? And what do I think our viewers want to know, want to see, and in an hour or sometimes 30 minutes, depending on the newscast. And most of my day is putting together the newscast. So I think sometimes people don't understand, as a producer, like it takes me 7 hours to put together just 1 hour of news. And I spend my whole day doing that pretty much. So that includes writing the scripts, putting the stories in order, choosing the camera shots, choosing video and sound, choosing graphics and making graphics. We also have a great graphics department that will kind of make our more thematic graphics like coronavirus, but the title bars that will say like Kim Potter sentencing or Kim Potter sentenced to 7 years. I'm writing and making those and really making it something visual and interesting, finding the best video, finding the most compelling sound. Like I was listening to the sentencing earlier today for Kim Potter, and during sentencing, there's always victim impact statements, which is when the family of the person, so in this case, Dante Wright's family speaks. And that's obviously a lot of really compelling emotional sound. And I know in my mind, I'm going to put that right at the top of my show, or I'm going to put that in my headlines, because that's something that will grab people's attention and is also really important to like hear the impact that this is having on their life too. And then again, things can change a lot. There's a lot of shifting and moving, a lot of going with the flow. There's a lot of communication always happening between everybody. We have there are kind of it's called our assignment desk, and that's where our web/editorial assignment editors sit. And they're kind of the ones disseminating all the information to us, and vice versa. If I see on Twitter that police are investigating a shooting, I'm like, hey, are we getting a photographer there? Are we getting this person there? It's also checking in with reporters. How's your story going? What elements have you gotten so far? What's your script looking like? Do you have any good video you can send back? So you're really kind of have a hand in everything, because at the end of the day, you're putting it all together. So if it's, I really like that part of it. I have a lot of ownership into what happens in the newscast, and to what like thousands of people around the Twin Cities, probably hundreds of thousands of people around the Twin Cities are watching, and how to keep them watching, for the whole newscast. So that's all part of it, communicating with anchors too, if they have questions about my scripts, they read through everything before they go on air. So they're not just sitting there. They do read through everything, and they have a lot of scripts to read through. And and just kind of going with the flow as things happen throughout the day. I think the most exciting part is that every day I walk into the newsroom and I have no idea what's going to happen. You have some things that are set in stone, but you have no idea what the day is going to bring you. I mean, who knows what's going to happen between even now and when I go into work? I have no idea. But I think that's the fun part of it. And you kind of can make it your own and do what you want to, show people what's happening and what's happening in the city. I will add one more thing. I think the part I also really love about the Twin Cities in general and the news market here is our viewers are like pretty smart in general. They tell you in TV news, you want to really dumb it down because like you have to assume that your viewer is coming in knowing nothing. But I think what's really great about the Twin Cities is the Twin Cities in general is a pretty informed viewer base. They know what's going on. They're pretty smart. And I like that you can kind of get more into context and get meatier with your stories because they're listening and they're paying attention. Whereas some cities, you can't really do that as much.
Thanks, Aleesa. That was really interesting. You said a lot of stuff that I did not know, and that was really cool. So for us in public radio, so I'm not a producer, I'm a reporter, and at our station, reporters are kind of like one-man bands. We're generating ideas, we're gathering the sound, we're bringing back the sound and producing it, writing the script, chopping up the audio, tracking it, writing up the digital piece. So that kind of is part and parcel to our job. We don't have like a team that, I guess the closest thing to producing the newscast we have is that every morning we'll have a news meeting with our whole news team. And basically that goes into the story of the day. We have something called top story, and who's ever on the top story duty for that day will have to turn around that story in a day if it's at all possible, and usually it is possible. So we basically just decide what is the important top story of that day. But at the same time, our reporters are working on a lot of sort of feature and enterprising pieces. So those are things that you can come up with on your own. Those are ideas that you can pitch. Those are ideas that take longer to percolate. Those are things that you might need multiple voices for, or multiple scenes. And you can sort of plot out, and we have a pitch form, and you sort of describe the narrow focus of the story, like what's the big question that the story is going to be answering, and what kind of voices do I need for this story. So those are kind of the distinguishing factors in the kinds of stories that we do. We also have a daily interview show that we produce called Lake Effect. And so there are producers for that show, and they're deciding like every day what sort of interviews they need for that show, and what sort of stories they can put on there. And for us as reporters, one of the things Aleesa mentioned was the time that it takes to put these things together, and that people don't realize that, like a 1 hour newscast can take 7 hours to produce. And it's the exact same thing with audio. With us at public radio, basically, your average story that we produce for sort of like a flagship news magazine style show is about 4 minutes. Sometimes we can even do shorter stories, like we can do 90-second stories or 2.5 minute stories, but usually they're about 4 minutes, 4.5 minutes, including host lead. So there are times where I've gone out and I've gone to multiple scenes and I've interviewed people for hours, and I only end up using, and I'm not kidding about this, I only end up using 20 seconds of tape from that person. It's happened. And the thing is, all your work, your background work, like talking to people, you're getting background information, you're trying to understand the story, you're trying to put together like your own understanding and how you can explain it to other people. And then the actual cut of tape, sometimes there's something really powerful that someone says, and you don't really need the rest of it, or that's all that makes it in the story. So that people are usually surprised when I mention that, but we really usually get a lot more material than we can include in the story. The other thing I would say is we focus a lot on interviewing. And for me, having worked as a criminal defense attorney, that was something that helped me in this job as a reporter, because as a criminal defense attorney, you're really having to gain someone's trust and connect with someone. And you're talking to people from all backgrounds and from perspectives that you might not be your own, or that you might not be coming from something in the same way, or you might have assumptions about something that happened, and this person completely convinces you otherwise. And so that experience helped me stay objective as a journalist, and it helped me try to understand multiple perspectives on an incident or a story or a policy and things like that. And I think that's helped with journalism. And then, of course, with interviewing, I think an important perspective is actually really, truly listening to people, because I think people, people feel when they're truly being listened to, and then they're willing to, be more earnest or get more comfortable with you. And so it's kind of a hard skill. And I have to say, when you're interviewing someone in real time, we don't have like a live show that we produce, but for the daily interview show Lake Effect, we produce interviews for that show. And when you're interviewing someone for something that's set to air, you really have to listen to them and listen to their responses and have a kind of a continued conversation. So those are skills that we really need to use as reporters in public radio. There's also, in terms of like, there's things we do to track people down and to brainstorm who would be needed for a story. Sometimes that's finding people at events that we call it man on the street or person on the street, and where you go to different events or organizations. Sometimes you can sleuth through Facebook groups to try to find people from a certain perspective. But those are also skills that you need to have to be able to just like walk up to people, talk to them, kind of get what you need. And another thing that I'd like to share from Aleesa's TV news experience, we as public radio journalists don't really ever have to do that sort of stand-up that TV journalists, TV reporters have to do in front of the camera and like basically saying everything that just happened at the scene without looking at notes most of the time and with just being perfectly articulate about that. That is a skill that I'm constantly flabbergasted about, but with TV journalists, I don't know how they do it. I'm not, that's not how I operate. My brain doesn't work that way. So I'm always impressed when they do that. But from a public radio perspective, most of our stuff is pre-produced and pre-recorded. We do have occasional live interviews where when you're doing a live interview with NPR, they actually write the script with you ahead of time, with as much time as you have. And then you're usually pretty good to go on that. I've done some live interviews with like the BBC. They don't prepare you ahead of time and they just ask you questions. But of course it's radio, so you can kind of check out your notes and you don't have to talk directly to the camera. And then a few other things. I don't know if we have much time, but I wanted to just mention writing for the ear. That's, I don't know how you write for a TV broadcast, but writing for print journalism is a lot different than writing for radio. Basically, the ideal is that you have like one idea per sentence and you're not trying to overwhelm the listener because they can't go back in time and re-listen to what you just said, like if they're reading a print report. So you really want to make it conversational and simple. And so speaking conversationally, like they tell you to kind of speak out loud what you want to write in your story before you start typing it out. And I'm still getting better at doing that. I had a long range of legal writing, and that's totally different than writing for radio. But I'm starting to get better at writing conversationally and writing for the ear. The other thing I would say is you really want good audio quality, because if you have phone tape or garbled tape, sometimes it's almost as bad as not having the voice at all in your story. So there's a really simple trick that people can use, which is if you're doing a remote interview, you get someone to record a voice memo app and record themselves and then email you the file. And then it sounds like you're in the room with them. So that's kind of like a trick. And I'm actually, NPR has like a training. There's tons of materials that people can get about working in radio, and I can share like a helpful link if anyone's interested in going into journalism, public radio reporting. I can share some things about that, but that's about it for now.
I'll just add a few things that you reminded me of. I think very similarly, that I did mention, it's conversational with broadcast, pretty same with radio. You want to be conversational. It's like you're talking to your mother. If you were to tell the story to your mom, how would you say it? You wouldn't, there's really easy to fall into the traps of like police talk, like he had trauma to his chest. Like you would never say that. You would say, no, he was shot in the chest, or he was punched in the chest, or whatever it was. It's being very conversational. And I think something that TV news really has to compete with is people's phones. So there's an element also of writing to the ear, because you want people to stop looking at their phones and to look up and pay attention to the TV. Because a lot of, we all sit with our phones everywhere. And besides being visually compelling, it's also kind of that same, also, whether it be a soundbite or your snappy, quick writing, you want to catch people's attention right from the beginning and hope that they don't decide to look down at their phone. Because the same thing, you can't go back and, with TV, I guess there's like recording now, but, generally, I don't think people care enough to rewind and listen again. They're just going to keep moving without them. So I think you brought up some good points, Maayan, about that. Okay, I think next we just had some examples. Oh no, where'd they go?
Oh no.
Oh, there they are. So one of the things, probably one of the biggest days in the newsroom I've had so far, was the verdict of Derek Chauvin. I was not working during the riot. I was not working in Indiana or in Minneapolis during the riots, but I was working for the entire trial. We preempted all of whatever Fox wanted to show. We showed every single minute of that trial, from gavel to gavel, from jury selection to the verdicts. We were one of 2 stations that did that. So the entire trial was televised. And now it's also something unique. And I know Wisconsin journalists are fighting for this too. Cameras were pretty much only allowed in the courtroom because of COVID, because usually, you know, like the law, you know, like courts should be open to the public. Well, during COVID, it wasn't really safe to be surrounded by a bunch of people. So they allowed cameras in the courtroom, which is this is kind of the first, was the first really big national televised trial since like OJ. Was OJ televised? I think it was, right? I don't know. Maybe not. But anyways, since then, we were able to also get the Potter trial televised, and all media groups were kind of all been banding together to try and get all access to the cameras in the courtroom for every trial. There's been kind of this shift in that. And I know Wisconsin is having that same thing, like the Rittenhouse was, because right now it was just all for COVID, but once COVID's gone, you know, having this amazing access inside the courtroom is way better than courtroom sketches, which is like what we're getting for the other 3 officers who are currently on federal trial. It's literally nonstop trials in Minneapolis. But anyways, on the day of the Chauvin trial, my job was we had so many crews everywhere. I was kind of ingesting and figuring out, okay, if I heard a good piece of sound or I saw some good video, I was writing it down and writing the time code. And because we were on air, once we got the verdict, once we knew a verdict was in, we went on air right away with our anchors. And they needed video and sound and stuff they could play back to fill time. So I was getting it cut, having the editors cut it, say, hey, I need this moment, I need this, I need this. And because I had such a good scope of what was going on and where everybody was, the producers of the evening show said, hey, could you put together what's called a NAP package, which means there's no reporter track, it's just sound bites put together. There's nobody saying, and then Molly cried, and then Molly cries. It's all just sounds put together. So I got all the pieces of video and sound I wanted. I said, this is how I want it put together. And then our editor actually put it together, because when you're in a smaller market, you're actually, as a producer, I should have mentioned this before, editing a lot of your own stuff. When you're in a bigger city, we have editors that edit everything for you in your newscast. So this was edited by someone else. The video was shot by like 10 different people at different places, you'll see. And so I will put this in full screen. Oh.
Here's another look at some of the.
Can you hear it? Did you hear that? Okay.
First reactions in Minneapolis after today's verdict was announced.
Justice is served, and we have to start here. And it's an oncoming thing. We have 3 more to try, and it's a big step, but we're moving forward.
I'm glad that it didn't go the other way.
Honorable, this is a turning point in America. Is it everything? Of course not. But is it a moment for hope? It is a moment for hope, of opportunity, and of justice.
Oops, don't want to. So yeah, that was something I put together for our newscast that, you know, I thought was really, we had little bits of pieces in that throughout the newscast, obviously, but we kind of ended that part of the newscast before we went to break with that. And I thought it was a really powerful just display of a crazy emotion. I mean, the range of emotions and how people were feeling in the literal moment the verdict was announced. It was pretty amazing. That day was pretty crazy. And then I'll just show a little bit. This is from an actual newscast that I produced. That was after there were like a few tornadoes. They weren't that turned deadly in the state. And I'll just kind of show the elements of that. We won't look at the whole thing, maybe just a story or two. And let me.
Fox 9 News at 5.
Oh. If it wants to load, it's a big file, so it. Oh.
Thousands across the state are cleaning up after storms brought down trees and blew debris across roads, into people's homes, and across their yards. In Hudson, pieces of the public library's roof and siding ending up inside the building. This morning, more than 60,000 people were without power. Some school districts even had to cancel school. More than 18,000 are still without power.
So just to illustrate, I basically, with this, I chose that camera shot. I knew we had all this crazy video of damage. So I was like, I want everyone to see all of it. And just to see if you're familiar with the Twin Cities area, these are all not near each other. So it kind of just shows the widespread damage of this. And our graphics department made these after the storm graphics for us.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Karen Scully.
And I'm Tim Blotz. The storms that rolled through this morning were also deadly, with a tree branch falling and killing a young child at a Native American powwow. We have team coverage tonight on the impact of the storm. Rob Olson is in Mankato, where that child was.
So whenever we have any good drone footage, we put them there. And then we had team coverage. So we like to kind of highlight all this. And I messed up. Don't look at that little graphic that's cut off on the left. But and then we have all our reporters that are in different spots. And then our weather storm, our meteorologist that is going over the crazy wind gusts. So this is something like I said, hey, I want 4 boxes. And I want the anchors in this box, and I want this in this box, and I want her in this box, and I want her in this box. So those are some of the small decisions that kind of look like they seamlessly come together, but something I actually deliberately chose to do to showcase, look at everything we're covering every single angle of this.
Was killed. We got our Leah Dino tonight. She's in the South Metro, which saw a lot of damage from the high winds. And then we have meteorologist Jennifer McDermott, who will give us a look at those wind gusts.
Let's start first with Rob. And Rob, this all started really as a celebratory event. Now, though, it is a day of grieving.
So again, like these on the bottom here, like I typed that out. That got put there. Even that little live thing on the top, I had to make sure that was put in there. And then once the reporter starts, that's kind of out of my hands. So like everything that the reporter says and does is all them gathering it. And another difference from radio is pretty much everything is being turned that day. So he went out there as soon as we had heard that a 4-year-old had died. He went down there, which was also an hour away, and he spoke to people from that community. He has his own photographer, photojournalist that takes all the video, and then he writes a script. He does all the interviews, and then says, here's how I want to put together this story. And then it gets put together. But I'll skip over that part. And then, let's see. And then for our other reporter, again, this was another like deliberate decision I made. This was some wild photos we got of just how crazy the wind was. And then
you're in Savage, where a lot of city buildings, parks saw a lot of damage there last night. Walk us through what you're seeing.
Yeah, we're here in Community Park where this is truly just a taste of the damage. These are the city's brand new pickleball courts. Now, this is significant because they just opened a month ago, and you can see how the fence is nearly flattened here. I'm told that these have been busy nonstop since they opened. As we continue and kind of pivot here through Community Park, I counted nearly a dozen of these huge pine trees that were flattened from this storm. And then in the distance there, that is the Public Works building. You see the silver flashing and the roof there, significant damage.
And then that's something different too with reporters, especially when there's something going on around them. Sometimes it's just them like, look at all this that's going on around me. And kind of what Maayan was talking about, they're just kind of talking and they have an idea of what they're going to say, obviously. And with this, obviously, it's pretty like, you know, the roof is like mangled. The fence was completely collapsed over. So again, that's all pretty much out of my hands, what she decides to do. And then I'll just go to like one more part. And then she ended her, oh, actually, this was a stand-up. Lots of damage, as you can see, that day. And then we went to weather. And yeah, but again, these are every moment you see, a producer has decided for it to look that way. So all these different shots and the different video, you know, it's all deliberate. A 2-shot like this that we would call with this graphic behind them. I chose that graphic. I decided to put it in that monitor and that they were going to sit there. So that's just kind of a taste of it. You can see all these little small decisions you have to make. That's why it takes so long, because it's okay. And because I put them here, I can't put them at this place next because that camera is using the same, you know, it's a lot of really small decisions. You're working with a lot of different people to make sure it all looks good and that it all works together. And yeah, I think I'll end it there. There's another camera shot. So yeah, you really get creative license as far as like, I'm going to put someone here, I'm going to put someone there in the studio. Here's the graphics I'm going to use and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, oops.
Here's another look at some of the first reactions in Minneapolis after today's verdict was announced.
Okay.
Point.
Oh, now this
Fox
one's
9.
okay. There we go. Sorry. There we go.
So first of all, Aleesa, that was really cool. I do watch local, our local, like I watch here in Milwaukee, and hearing you give the backstory of like all the thinking that goes into it. I mean, as a viewer, you can tell that there are a lot of decisions that have to be made just because of the amount of stories that are happening just to cover that day's worth of stuff and how much the coordination. But like hearing you talk about it, it's like insane the level of decision making and planning, and I mean, and then the whole camera angles and everything. It's just like, that's a lot. But anyway, I just have a couple things here, but if anyone wants to like wrap up or anything, they can just look at this on another occasion. It just, you know, I don't know how much time, Kelsey, what do you think? Should we just wrap up, or what do you think?
Well, I want to make sure that there's time for questions if anybody has them. How long are these stories?
No, I'm not going to play the story. I just talked, give a little bit of background about it, but we don't have to. I mean, if anyone's really interested, they're just some of my favorite things from last year, and I can give context to anyone if they want to ask any questions about it or anything.
Well, awesome. Let's open up the floor to see if anyone who's joined us has questions for Maayan or Aleesa. I can kick things off. So both of you had examples of obviously very heavy stories. And I was working at Minnesota Public Radio when all the George Floyd things were happening in the Twin Cities. And I know a topic of conversation in the newsroom there was how are reporters and producers taking care of themselves in the midst of such a tumultuous time. I mean, the news is always kind of tumultuous, but I feel like in the last couple of years with a pandemic, with uprisings, it's been particularly tough. And so Maayan and Aleesa, how do you find balance and take care of yourselves so that you can sustain your career while living, a healthy life?
For me, I really need to get good sleep. Like, I'm literally useless if I don't get like my 8 hours. Like, I'm just like but from a work perspective, I really need the balance of what I'm working on. I kind of always have to have like at least one sort of creative story that I at least am thinking about working on, or that I'm actually working on, something that is maybe a little lighter or maybe a little more sound rich, or one of the stories that I had listed there was about a man who creates cowbells in Caledonia, Wisconsin, and he's like one of the only cowbell artisans in the country, and he was totally self-taught. And so like going over there and producing a story, it just like balances out the coverage of like battles in the state legislature or like criminal justice and protests. But of course, with racial justice issues in particular, that's something that, I mean, we are constantly reckoning with that and thinking about that in many different ways, not like trying to figure out ways not just to represent, the demands and needs of protesters and when racial justice issues become the big issue in the news cycle, but also to constantly make it a priority to to highlight, entrepreneurs of color and people of color, and like stories, and diversify the airwaves, and really represent the city and the Southeast Wisconsin, because Milwaukee is a majority minority city. And so we're really trying to take efforts to make sure that we're not, overlooking very wide and important swaths of the community, because public radio is ultimately for the public. So there's a lot of work to be done there, and we're trying to do that.
Yeah, I think I'm very bad at unplugging, just because I am so like, I think the reason I love journalism is because I love knowing what's happening. And I like, am really bad with, I doom scroll on Twitter all the time when things are happening. I think unfortunately it's a lot of journalists have learned how to really like not have emotion about things, which isn't always good, because you wanna have empathy and sympathy and understand what's going on from that perspective. But sometimes I am guilty of just like, even after I leave work, of like, oh my God, what's going on? What's happening? But you still have to take steps to like have fun, do things outside of work that aren't work related. I'm also really thankful right now just to be in a newsroom that like understands that, and really like, after a hard day of news, where we get our managers like tell us how much they appreciate us, or we had like in December we had a virtual pasta making class. Like, they kind of do things for us to make sure that we're not always on. But I think journalists by nature sometimes are always on, and I think it does lead to a lot of burnout in the industry. People are leaving like crazy right now, and it's partially because of the industry and just how it functions as far as an industry as the whole. But I think there are newsrooms that are really taking care of their people. And, with the nature of the business, it's totally understandable that people need to step away, because it is a lot. I mean, especially as a reporter, when you're covering a protest every single day, or you're covering a trial every single day. Like, we have a reporter he's the kind of our crime guy, and he did the entire Potter trial. He covered the entire Chauvin trial, and now we're doing the federal trial. And he's like, I can't do it. Like another reporter needs to do this because, I need a break from covering these trials. So that's been, and of course, and our managers respect that. And another reporter is covering the federal trial. And, in a few months, we'll be covering the state trial of the 3 officers. So, it is a lot, especially it depends what city you're in, but Minneapolis is the center of a lot of controversy, a lot of tension, a lot of trauma. And, we have to show some of that trauma too. We have to show what's happening in our community and how it's impacting them. And, the news is kind of nonstop, but when you come home, like I don't watch the news outside of work. There are some, I don't go home. I watch Netflix, I binge my shows, but yeah.
Thank you both. Pat?
I don't really have a question. I have to run. I have a dentist appointment, but I wanted to thank everybody for being here. And this was a really great idea, Kelsey. And I look forward to hearing, I know Aleesa, and I've got a couple students here, and I hope that they take notes. And thank you to our speakers for providing ideas. I've screen captured them all for the audio and the TV class. So I just want to say thanks to everybody. And I'm sorry I have to run. I just wanted to let you know that.
Thanks, Pat.
Thank you.
Before we wrap up today, does anyone else have any questions?
I had a question for Aleesa, actually, just like in terms of deciding, having to reach a decision, especially under pressure about which story to include in a newscast, whether that be at last minute, sort of what questions, I guess, you ask yourself to reach, like, have you ever sort of grappled with, being really indecisive about that process, or how you come to that decision?
Yeah, I mean, I think the great part, one, is like we're a team. I have an executive producer above me and there's other producers. So a lot of times it's just a conversation that we all have, and we kind of all talk about, okay, yeah, we should do this, or no, maybe we leave this out today and wait till we get more information or whatever. Sometimes we have to advocate for stories to get in, but then again, we have an hour-long newscast. So a lot of times we're actually trying to find things to fill the show with. It kind of depends on the day and what's going on. But yeah, you kind of just, news judgment is kind of a skill you acquire, but I always think of it I really think it's simpler than people think. Do you think it's interesting? If you think it's interesting, your viewers will think it's interesting. That's like at the simple base of it. If you read that headline and you're like, holy crap, that's crazy, your viewers will be like, whoa, that's crazy. And I think at the simplest point, that's all you have to ask yourself is this interesting? If I told my friend this, would they want to listen or read the rest or hear the rest? And I think at the simplest point, that's kind of where the decision falls to. But with the length of a newscast, we are lucky in that we do get to put in a lot of different stories. But sometimes, as far as pitching stories, sometimes you do have to advocate, and that's what those meetings are for too. And then breaking news, as far as like last minute decisions, sometimes you do have to like sacrifice a story to get a breaking news story in that you maybe probably already wrote and already did all this work for. And that's kind of sometimes the nature of the game. And you kind of, as the producer, you kind of already have in your mind, like, okay, these are the stories I can probably drop, or maybe that's, and the other thing is too, is we have so many newscasts. We have a 5, a 6, a 7 on our like plus channel, and a 9 and a 10. So sometimes I'm like, you know what, this story ran all day. I can drop it. It's okay. So yeah, but it's definitely a skill you learn as you work in newsrooms. And I think, as Maayan said, that, you learn a lot on the job. Like, yes, I went to J school, but really once you're in a newsroom, you learn so much about how everything functions and what is important to communities and what is compelling. I think that hands-on experience is invaluable.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you everybody for being here. Thank you, Maayan and Aleesa, for sharing your experience and your stories with us. That was much appreciated and so helpful. We have some more WSUM workshops over the next couple of days. Everybody can find more information about that at WSUM.org under the workshops tab. And I have been recording this meeting, so I am hoping to post all of the videos from the workshops in the next month or so as well. So keep an eye out for that. But in the meantime, thank you everybody for being here and have a great weekend.